Hi guys, welcome back. We've moved past the household names now. The cases you're about to hear made headlines once, some of them massive headlines, but then something happened. The media moved on. The outrage cooled. These stories sank beneath the surface of public memory, preserved mostly in court archives and fading newspaper clippings. This is Tier 2 of the Parricide Iceberg, where the crimes are just as devastating, just as complex, but for whatever reason, time and distance have dimmed their light. Let's begin. Starting with Noura Jackson, Memphis, Tennessee, June 5th, 2005. 18-year-old Noura Jackson should have been thinking about college, friends, and her future. Instead, she was about to become the prime suspect in one of the most brutal murders the city had seen in years. That morning, police arrived at the Jackson home to find a brutal scene. Her mother, Jennifer Jackson, was found dead in their upscale home, stabbed over 50 times in the chest and neck. The floor was soaked with blood, furniture overturned, drawers pulled open, as if someone had tried and failed to fake a robbery. Noura called 911, crying that her mother was dead. But when officers arrived, something about her demeanor stood out. She wasn't frantic. Instead, she was eerily calm. At first, there was no clear motive. The Jacksons weren't struggling. Jennifer worked in real estate, provided well for her daughter, and they lived comfortably. But beneath the surface, they had the usual tension between a strict single mother and her rebellious teenage daughter, but there wasn't any record of violence. Noura wanted freedom, wanted to party, do drugs. Basically, she wanted a life her mother didn't approve of. Friends later told investigators that Jennifer had confronted Noura the night before about throwing unauthorized parties at the house. The argument had even escalated. And then, sometime in the early morning hours, Jennifer was attacked in her own bedroom. When detectives examined the evidence, their suspicions grew. Noura was arrested on September 29th, 2005, just 3 months into the investigation, and charged with second-degree murder. During the trial, the prosecution's theory was straightforward. Noura killed her mother during a rage-fueled confrontation, then tried to stage the scene to look like a robbery gone wrong. Drawers were pulled open, items scattered, but nothing of significant value was missing. The staging was clumsy and amateur, and Noura's alibi kept changing. Phone records and surveillance footage didn't match her timeline. Her fingerprints were found near the scene, and though she swore she'd spent the night at a friend's house, that friend's testimony didn't fully back her up. The trial was a spectacle. Defense attorneys argued an unknown intruder committed the murder, pointing to unidentified DNA found at the scene. But the prosecution hammered on Noura's behavior. Her lack of emotion, her inconsistent statements, and her motive. On February 9th, 2009, at the Shelby County Criminal Justice Center in downtown Memphis, after a mistrial, a second jury convicted Noura of second-degree murder. She was sentenced to 20 years and 9 months in prison at the age of 22. But her fight didn't end there. In 2014, the Tennessee Supreme Court overturned her conviction, citing prosecutorial misconduct, claiming that key evidence had been withheld that could have influenced the jury. 2 years later, Noura accepted an Alford plea to voluntary manslaughter, maintaining her innocence while acknowledging the state had enough evidence to convict. She was released soon after, having already served over a decade. Today, the case remains one of Memphis's most divisive. Some see Noura as a manipulative killer who escaped justice. Others see her as a young woman caught in a flawed system and an avalanche of circumstantial evidence. By the time she walked free, almost no one outside Tennessee remembered her name. What began as front-page horror had faded into courtroom dust. Did Noura Jackson really murder her mother in a moment of teenage rage? Or did the system destroy 2 lives instead of 1? The truth remains buried, like so many stories in this iceberg, under years of uncertainty and silence. If you're enjoying the video so far, please don't forget to like and subscribe. Let's continue. Patricia Columbo. If that case felt murky, this next one is clear and cold as winter glass. Elmhurst, Illinois, May 4th, 1976. Patricia Columbo was 19. Her parents, Frank and Mary Columbo, were known in their suburban neighborhood as a quiet, respectable couple. Patricia had once been their bright, promising daughter. That is, until she met Frank DeLuca, a 36-year-old married man who managed a pharmacy where she worked part-time. Their relationship was scandalous, obsessive, and quickly turned dark. Patricia's very wealthy family did not approve of this. Her father was a prominent dentist, respected and traditional. Her mother and younger brother sided with him. They wanted Patricia to end the relationship, but she refused. So Patricia made a different choice. She conspired with her lover to eliminate her entire family. The murders were brutal and methodical. Her parents, Frank and Mary, had been beaten and shot. Patricia's younger brother, Michael, just 13 years old, had been stabbed repeatedly in his bed. The crime scene was so brutal that one officer said it looked like someone had taken pleasure in the killing. The bodies were discovered 3 days after the murders. At first, investigators suspected a burglary, but nothing valuable was taken. Then came the strange details. Patricia showed up at the house afterward, acting distant and curious, asking questions about what they'd found. They questioned her but had no reason to suspect her until the following week. A friend, motivated by the promise of reward money, led the police to the men who had discussed killing the Columbo family with Patricia. After the couple was arrested, DeLuca's employees revealed that they had seen him washing and burning blood-stained clothes the day after the murders. It seemed he had kept them silent by threatening their families. While in jail, DeLuca had even tried to have these witnesses killed through a cellmate, but another inmate intervened and reported the plan to the police. Soon, with further investigation, the truth began to unfold. Patricia and DeLuca had plotted the murders together. They did this because Patricia had wanted her family dead so she and DeLuca could live free, without her parents' disapproval. They'd also hoped to receive the family inheritance, not knowing that the Columbos had actually written Patricia out of their wills years earlier. During the trial, prosecutors painted Patricia as the driving force, manipulative, remorseless, and disturbingly calm when confronted with photos of the victims. The jury agreed. They were both sentenced to 200 to 300 years in prison. Even in prison, Patricia's story didn't stop. She'd managed to keep herself in the spotlight for a while. In 1979, it was reported that she assisted in organizing sex orgies involving prison guards and wardens at the Dwight, Illinois facility. As a result of the scandal, high-ranking officials at the prison, including the warden, were forced to resign. She also became known for writing long, poetic letters to journalists and pen pals, always maintaining that she'd been misunderstood, that DeLuca was the real monster. But when you look at the evidence, her fingerprints were everywhere. Her motives were clear. Currently, Patricia is still incarcerated, now in her 70s, repeatedly denied parole, most recently in November 2024, but Frank DeLuca died in prison in January 2023. In recent years, her case has almost vanished from public memory. But for detectives who worked it, it remains one of the most disturbing parricide cases in Illinois history. Not just for the brutality, but for the sheer emotional coldness behind it. If the Menendez case in Tier 1 showed a family falling apart from greed and resentment, the Columbo case shows something else. The quiet rot of obsession, greed, and what happens when love warps into something unrecognizable. Brian Blackwell. The cases so far have been about rage, greed, and control. This next one is about something stranger, something medical science still doesn't fully understand. Merseyside, England, July 2004. Brian Blackwell was the kind of son people point to proudly. Polite, top of his class, even gifted at tennis. His adoptive parents, 72-year-old Sydney and 61-year-old Jacqueline, adored him. They were retired and devoted to their son. They supported every ambition, every private tennis lesson, every academic dream, but they had no idea what was coming, because behind that perfect image was a lie. At 18, Brian had developed an obsession with prestige. He told classmates he was a professional tennis player sponsored by Nike. He claimed to own property, drive a luxury car, and have a bank account filled with prize money. None of it was true. But he believed it so completely that he began living it, even using his parents' money to fund the fantasy. The breaking point came when Brian tried to secure a £40,000 bank loan using his father's identity. When they finally confronted him about the lies and the mounting debt, he snapped. In the early hours of July 25th, during what investigators believe was an argument about money, Brian attacked them both. His father was stabbed and bludgeoned with a hammer. His mother suffered a similar fate with a carving knife. The violence was fast and frenzied. Then, chillingly, Brian didn't run. After the murders, he calmly cleaned himself up, withdrew more cash, flew his girlfriend to New York, and paid for a luxury vacation using his murdered parents' credit cards. Broadway shows, expensive restaurants, and designer shopping. He even posted photos of the trip online, smiling, all while his parents' bodies decomposed in their quiet suburban home. A week later, he returned to school and discovered he had achieved A's in all of his A-levels, grades that would allow him to secure a place at the University of Nottingham to study medicine in October. But weeks later, in September, a neighbor, noticing the foul smell, decided to call the police. Inside, detectives found the couple's remains, and police initially thought they had been shot based on the severity of the attacks. The trial took place in Liverpool Crown Court, June 2005. During the trial, psychologists diagnosed Brian with narcissistic personality disorder. They said he lacked empathy and lived in a fantasy world where only his own image mattered. His crime, they argued, wasn't out of rage, but out of ego, because his parents had threatened the illusion he'd built, and he couldn't allow that. In 2005, Brian pleaded guilty to manslaughter on grounds of diminished responsibility and was sentenced to life in prison with a minimum term of 12 years. The media storm was intense but brief. Within months, the story was overshadowed by broader debates about mental health and criminal responsibility. Brian Blackwell served his sentence, was released in 2016 after a parole board hearing, and has since disappeared from public view. Brian Blackwell didn't seem to mourn or even grasp the reality of what he'd done. It's as if he believed the deaths were a necessary part of maintaining his lie, that without them, the world he built would collapse. In the iceberg of parricide, his story sits somewhere between the privileged and the pathological, proof that sometimes the most terrifying killers aren't driven by rage at all, but by the quiet, chilling certainty that they deserve everything. Jennifer Pan. We're shifting continents now, but the pressure and expectations travel anywhere. Markham, Ontario, Canada, November 8th, 2010. On the surface, the Pan family embodied the immigrant success story. Jennifer Pan was 24 years old and living a double life. To her parents, Han and Bitch Pan, hard-working Vietnamese immigrants who'd sacrificed everything for their children's success, she was the perfect daughter. She had high grades, acceptance to university, and a future in pharmacology. But it was all a lie. Jennifer had flunked out of high school years earlier. She'd forged report cards, faked acceptance letters, and invented an entire academic career while secretly living with a boyfriend, Daniel Wong, who her parents would never approve of. When her father, Han Pan, discovered the truth, he gave her an ultimatum: end the relationship, come home, get her life together, or lose her family forever. Jennifer chose a third option. She hired 3 men to kill her parents. The plan was staged to look like a home invasion. The men would break in, demand money, shoot both parents, and leave. Jennifer would be tied up and be the traumatized daughter who survived a random attack. On the night of November 8th, that's exactly what happened. Well, almost. Jennifer staged a break-in. She unlocked the front door and texted Daniel's associates the signal. Her mother, Bitch Ha Pan, was shot and killed. But her father survived a gunshot wound to the head, and when he woke up in the hospital, he remembered something crucial. Jennifer hadn't been tied up like the other victims. She'd been walking around, talking to the intruders, even directing them. Police pulled Jennifer's phone records. They found texts to a man named Daniel coordinating the attack. They interviewed her for hours, and her story eventually crumbled. She admitted to staging fake suicide attempts for sympathy. She confessed to years of lies. And finally, she admitted hiring the killers for $10,000, though she claimed she'd only wanted her mother dead, not her father. But the jury didn't buy it. There was suspicion that she was also doing this for an inheritance of about $500,000. Jennifer Pan was convicted of first-degree murder and attempted murder. She received a sentence of 25 years to life with no parole eligibility. Her father survived, but was left with permanent injuries and unimaginable grief. During sentencing, he said, "When I lost my wife, I lost my daughter at the same time." It's one of the most chilling aspects of parricide, the emotional death that happens before the physical one. Jennifer Pan's story became infamous in Canada, partly because it revealed something deeper than violence. It was analyzed through the lens of immigrant family dynamics, the pressure to succeed, and the collision of cultures. Jennifer's father, Han Pan, has never spoken publicly about forgiving his daughter. How could he? She orchestrated his wife's murder, tried to kill him too. all because she couldn't face disappointing them. The love that drove her parents to immigrate, to work tirelessly, to demand excellence, that same love became an unbearable weight. And when Jennifer couldn't carry it anymore, she chose violence. In May 2023, the Court of Appeal ordered a retrial on a first-degree murder charge, but again upheld the attempted murder conviction. She's still in prison. Her father is still alive. And somewhere between those two facts is a story about the cost of expectations we'll never fully understand. Gypsy Rose Blanchard. This next case probably sounds familiar. It shouldn't be in Tier 2 at all, except for one strange thing. Everyone remembers Gypsy Rose as a victim because most people forget she helped plan a murder. Springfield, Missouri, June 9th, 2015. 23-year-old Gypsy Rose Blanchard had been sick her entire life, or so everyone thought. Leukemia, muscular dystrophy, seizures, and developmental delays. Her mother, Dee Dee Blanchard, paraded her daughter through hospitals, charity events, and even got them a house from Habitat for Humanity. Gypsy used a wheelchair, a feeding tube, and appeared years younger than her actual age. They were the perfect victims, and people loved to help. But Gypsy wasn't sick. She'd never been sick. Dee Dee had Munchausen syndrome by proxy, a rare psychiatric disorder where a caregiver fabricates or induces illness in someone under their care. For over 2 decades, Dee Dee forced Gypsy into surgeries, medications, and a wheelchair she didn't need. She shaved Gypsy's head. She told her she was mentally disabled. She controlled every aspect of her life through medical lies. When Gypsy finally realized the truth, she met a man online named Nicholas Gojon, who believed her and promised to save her. Together, they made a plan. Dee Dee had to die. Nicholas would come to the house, kill Dee Dee, and Gypsy would be free. On the night of June 14th, 2015, Nicholas entered the house, and while Gypsy hid in the bathroom, he stabbed Dee Dee 17 times in her back while she slept in her bedroom. They took cash from the house and fled to Wisconsin, where they were arrested days later. The case shocked the nation. Yes, it was a murder, but the context of the decades of abuse, the psychological torture, deception, and control complicated everything. Gypsy pleaded guilty to second-degree murder in 2016 and was sentenced to 10 years. She was released on parole in December 23 after serving 8 years. Nicholas Godejohn, who actually committed the murder, received life in prison without parole. The disparity in sentencing tells you everything about how the courts saw Gypsy. They saw her as a victim who'd been pushed to the absolute brink. And that's how the public sees her too. The Hulu series The Act dramatized her story, painting Dee Dee as the monster and Gypsy as the prisoner. Documentaries focused on Munchausen by proxy, on medical abuse, and survival. When Gypsy was released, she became a minor celebrity, interviewed on talk shows, active on social media. People root for her because they see her as someone who escaped hell. But here's what gets forgotten. Gypsy helped plan her mother's death. She didn't wield the knife, but she orchestrated the act. In legal terms, she is a parricide. And while the narrative has shifted to sympathy and understanding, the raw reality, complicity and murder, is still there, quietly chilling. This is why Gypsy Rose Blanchard sits in Tier 2, a case famous for context, tragedy, and survival, but the actual crime is often overshadowed in public memory. Nehemiah Griego. We close this tier with a case that almost became something else entirely, something much worse. But because it didn't, because it stayed contained within one family, it faded fast. Albuquerque, New Mexico, January 19th, 2013. 15-year-old Nehemiah Griego lived in a religious household. His father, Greg Griego, was a pastor and fire department chaplain. His mother, Sarah, homeschooled their 5 children. From the outside, they seemed like a stable, faithful family, but inside Nehemiah's head, something was fracturing. He'd just gone through a breakup. He was obsessed with violent video games, with mass shootings, with Columbine. He was angry, isolated, and fascinated by death. And on the night of January 19th, he retrieved a .22 caliber rifle and began moving through his house, room by room. He shot his mother first while she slept, then his younger brother and sister, Zephaniah, Jael, and Angelina, ages 9, 5, and 2. Each life extinguished in cold, methodical fashion. When his father, Greg, returned home from work at a local homeless shelter, Nehemiah used an AR-15 rifle to finish the massacre. 5 members of his family were dead before dawn. And then Nehemiah did something chilling. He didn't flee immediately. He sat with the bodies for hours. He considered his options. He'd originally planned to drive to his father's church and open fire during services, to go out in a blaze of violence like the shooters he idolized. But ultimately, he didn't. He sent the picture of his deceased mother to his ex-girlfriend, lied about what happened, and waited for the police to arrive. During interrogation, Nehemiah was calm, articulate, and disturbingly detached. He explained his fascination with mass violence. He talked about his breakup as a trigger. Mental health evaluations later diagnosed schizoaffective disorder and severe mixed personality disorder, revealing a detachment from reality that had been building for months. In October 2015, Nehemiah pleaded guilty to 2 counts of second-degree murder for his parents and 3 counts of child abuse resulting in death for the siblings. He was sentenced to 3 concurrent life sentences, plus 7 years consecutively, with parole eligibility in 30 years, meaning he won't have a chance at freedom until his early 50s. The case briefly made national headlines, overshadowed by Sandy Hook, which had happened just a month earlier. But because Nehemiah didn't carry out a public attack, because the violence remained inside his family, the story faded quickly. He became a footnote in the broader narrative of American mass violence, remembered mostly by locals, law enforcement, and legal scholars. He's still incarcerated, serving his sentence in a facility for juveniles, now in his mid-20s. The boy who killed his entire family because he was angry and fascinated by death is becoming a man. Whether he understands what he did, whether he feels remorse, we don't know. The court records are partially sealed. The family is gone, and the public has moved on. And the question his case leaves lingering is one of human nature. How does fascination, obsession, and mental illness combine to create unimaginable violence? And what responsibility does society bear when it sees the warning signs too late? And that's the end of Tier 2. Thank you for sticking with me. Seriously. If you found this video gripping, drop a like, comment your thoughts, and subscribe if you haven't already. These 6 cases, Noura Jackson, Patricia Columbo, Brian Blackwell, Jennifer Pan, Gypsy Rose Blanchard, and Nehemiah Griego, all show a different edge of the Parricide Iceberg. Here, the violence is just as real, just as devastating. But the public gaze didn't stay. Headlines faded eventually. Documentaries aired, then disappeared. The outrage cooled. And yet, the pain, the questions, the horror, that never really goes away. What connects them isn't just the violence, but how each story got lost in time or complexity, geography, culture, media attention, or even the way the narrative was framed. Some of these names you might recognize, others you've likely never heard of, but each one is a reminder that tragedy doesn't need fame to be real. These cases are disturbing. Talking about them honestly makes me feel uneasy, but it's important to face these uncomfortable truths. In the next video, we'll go even deeper into Tier 3, where we have unsettling cases involving juveniles. The stories are darker, stranger, and harder to explain. So, good night everyone, and stay safe out there.